Hello, people. I have finished a book, The Dogs of God, Columbus, the Inquisition, and the Defeat of the Moors. I don't know if you really have to say Moors. Maybe you just say more, maybe more as an individual and more as a group. You know, the same word goes for plural. I don't know. This was a good book. I read it really fast. I have read a couple of other books by this guy. I thought I had sort of recognized the name. Oh, where the fuck is it? I can't find it. I read a couple of other books by him. This all takes place in Spain. It basically all takes place in the last quarter of the 1400s, except for the birth of Isabella and the birth of Ferdinand. They go into that, and they also trace these people, the main characters of the book, to their deaths, which for some of them it's in the 1500s. There's a lot of popery in this book. At this time, the Catholic nations kind of hang on what the Pope says and what the Pope does. The Pope actually splits the world up between Portugal and Spain, which is, kind of a joke. Less than 100 years later, it becomes a joke. This was published in 2005. This is the first edition, and I got it for like $3 at a Goodwill bookstore. 338 pages. I mean, that's another reason why it was so quick of a read. And it's kind of a good author. Only, I've read enough books to complain about even the good authors. He leaves out a lot of details. For me, the most interesting part was the defeat of the Moor. This is Moorish Spain that I'm talking about. The fucking Moors were there, from like the year 850 until almost the end of the 1400s. It was 1492 that they finally took over all the Moorish strongholds. It was confined to Granada, and the author's not super specific about what happens to all these people. I know a lot of them were subject to the Inquisition, and they had to, become baptized, or they would be burnt at the stake and shit like that. But probably a lot of them didn't. Some of them did move back to North Africa. Moors were a little bit different than the other Arabic caliphates. The northwestern Africa is kind of where the home of the Moor is. And there's probably people that would argue with me about that, but I'm going to stick to it. Isabella and Ferdinand became the king and queen of Spain, and the bottom of page 35, I thought this was a little bit weird. This is when they get married, and of course it's a big deal, a lot of pomp and circumstance. That night, the marriage was consummated. By long-standing tradition, courtiers were posted at the door of the royal bedchamber. When the appropriate time had elapsed, they burst into the bedchamber to strip the bed of its sheet. This trophy they brought to the eager crowd below, displaying its stains as if the relic were a triumphal battle flag. To ensure no fraud, more witnesses were sent in to double-check the bed itself. And then we go all the way to page 150. I don't have a whole lot of notes here. There's fucking no-see-ums out here, God damn it. It's just warm enough for them little bastards. Second paragraph, page 150. This takes place in 1483. Great God he might be, but Allah had not prevented the forces of the unbeliever from penetrating deep into Moorish land the summer before. The invaders had ravaged the meadows around Antequera, burning fields, vineyards, and olive orchards, and stealing whatever livestock they could. Before the small but significant Alcazaba, which is a fortress, of Alora, a mere 15 kilometers northwest of Malaga, the Christians had displayed their terrible new engines of warfare, brought to Spain by French, German, and Italian mercenaries. The new artillery included a devastating cannon called a bombard, capable of hurling 200-pound boulders and iron-cased, gunpowder-filled shells, which quickly reduced the tall, thin-walled towers of the outposts to ruin and threw and threw the population into confusion. I don't know. I'm just fascinated by the advent of artillery, and this was in the 1480s. So yes, they had artillery. I always look at the Great Siege of Constantinople as kind of the very beginnings of artillery. I know it began a little bit before that. That Siege of Constantinople was in 1453, but there, I don't think they had any iron-cased cannonballs. They made all their cannonballs, they had people actually chipping a cannonball out of a solid stone. They were all solid stone, the cannonballs. And firearms as well kind of fascinates me. When did they come around, Third paragraph, page 165. I would love to get a book that just chronicles the entire, from the time that the Moors invaded Spain to the time they were stopped by Charles Martel, and the time that they, their kingdom got chipped away at, the Reconquista. When they first went into Spain, this is so long ago that it was the Visigoths that were there. There was no Spain. Paragraph 165, 1, 2, 3. The reach of Torquemada, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he was like the leader of the Inquisition. The reach of Torquemada now stretched across the peninsula. In February 1484, Pope Innocent VIII, under pressure from Ferdinand, fired the local inquisitors in Barcelona and replaced them with Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor. Meanwhile, was staging ever greater spectacles. On February 12, 1486, in Toledo, 750 lapsed Christians were paraded through the streets from the church of San Pedro Martir to the cathedral, where they were to be reconciled to the Christian faith. In the freezing cold, the men walked barefoot and hatless, but the women had it worse. They were absolutely naked, adding leering lasciviousness to the other roiling emotions that an auto-da-fé induced. All carried candles as the feverish crowd taunted them along the way. An auto-da-fé is just the ceremony that they had before they, the lucky ones were reconciled to the church, and the unlucky ones were burnt to death at the stake. And in between that, there were ones that actually got strangled before they were burnt to death. I guess it's better to be strangled than to burn to death in a fire. And the people that were victims of the Inquisition, there were some Christians, certainly, but not very many. They were the Jews, and they were what they called conversos. These were Jewish people that had converted to the Catholic faith, many years before. Even the children of them, had the same, they were suspect in the same manner as any other converso. Boabdil was, and I'm wondering if that's even spelled right. Boabdil was the legitimate king of the Moorish states that were left at this time. He ended up being kind of a rotten character. There was a couple of other Moors that were great warriors, and they kind of did a lot better job of fighting off the Christian forces than Boabdil. Boabdil actually sold everybody under the bus. Fourth paragraph, 167, and I have traitors written down there. 1, 2, 3, 4. With the warning of the old hermit to be a sovereign rather than a slave still ringing in his ear, Boabdil took charge of his northern garrison of Loja and promptly attempted to be both sovereign and slave. He sent an obsequious message to Ferdinand, informing the Castilian king of his arrangement with El Zagal. El Zagal was a much more brave, not a traitor at all. He fought till the end, and reconfirming his status as a vassal. As such, Ferdinand was not to attack Loja. In return, beyond the annual duty and the return of captives, Boabdil promised safe passage through his lands for the Castilian armies as they moved against the strongholds of his uncle in the south. He just threw everybody under the bus, this Boabdil. And the siege of Malaga, bottom of 186. And this one was kind of humorous, I thought, and that's why I noted it. This is a siege, and the siege didn't last long because at this time castles and walls, were not built to withstand a bombardment of cannon. They did have catapults, too. Things turned ugly. One summer night, 150 Moors stole through the enemy lines with gunpowder and provisions, only to be apprehended before they reached the city walls. One of these Moors insisted on an audience with Ferdinand, professing to have important intelligence about the sorry state of the defenders. As the king and queen were not nearby, the Moor was ushered into a tent of a Portuguese nobleman, Dom Alvaro, the brother of the Duke of Braganza. Impressed by the knight's noble appearance and thinking him to be Ferdinand, the Moor pulled out his dagger and proceeded to stab the Christian knight until the other Christian nobles rushed in and literally sliced the assassin to pieces. When the king returned, he ordered the dead assassin to be sewn back together and catapulted over the city wall. In proportionate reprisal, the Moors killed a Galician captive, strapped the body to the back of a donkey, and sent the animal loping through the gate. That's all I got. That's all the notes I got. It was a pretty good book. I am reading another one, and I'm about 1/4 through with the other one. And the other one's, it's a pretty cool book. Thanks for watching.